It's always a wonderful relief when you find a book that's actually worth the hype, where the hype is absolutely real. This is absolutely as good as everyone's saying it is. It's a huge relief, and you also get to read a wonderful book. I should clarify up front that one of the reasons this book is so popular is that the woman who wrote it is a very big part of a lot of people's childhoods, but not mine. Jennette McCurdy was a child actor during the golden age of Nickelodeon, an age which lasted a long time, and I watched a lot of it growing up, but she came in just after I was of an age where I started to move on. I grew up in the 90s and early 2000s on things like Kenan and Kel, The Amanda Show, Drake and Josh, and then iCarly came along just after I was kind of done with Nickelodeon. And Jennette McCurdy was in iCarly. So I've never seen her act, as far as I know, but the people who grew up on her adore her. From what I've been able to tell, the people who grew up on her were very invested in this book. But aside from all of that, this is a fantastic memoir, and I love a good memoir. In case you don't know what this is, in case you haven't seen the hype, in case you haven't been paying attention to it, I'm Glad My Mum Died is a very provocatively titled memoir about a miserable childhood spent being forced to act and audition for TV and film stuff in Hollywood at the behest of a possessive and abusive mother. Jennette McCurdy and I are around about the same age. She was born in the early 90s. She grew up in a small town in California, about 2 hours drive from Los Angeles. And while I spent my childhood watching Nickelodeon shows, she spent hers being in them. Her mother wished she could have been an actor, and she squandered her chance. She didn't have the opportunity. She has 3 sons and a daughter, and she puts all of her hopes and dreams into her daughter to be the person she wished she could have been. And so from the age of 6, Jennette is taken to auditions, she is encouraged to act, and she does it for her mother. Her mother says, "I'm doing this for you. I'm giving you the life I never got to have." And Jennette is going, "Well, I'm doing it for you because I want to make my mother happy. Kids like to see their parents happy." From this moment onwards, what we see is a toxic, abusive, dangerous relationship that leads to eating disorders, depression, bad encounters with toxic men, and a generally awful life. I'm sure for the people that grew up watching iCarly, this must be a very, very powerful thing. To see a beloved actor who played a beloved character be very, very miserable in the background the entire time. And while Jennette McCurdy's popularity with people who grew up watching the TV shows that she was in is important, the other reason that this book is probably such a big deal is that it has a very provocative title and cover image. This book is called I'm Glad My Mum Died. That's a powerful title. But as you read on, you quickly start to think, yeah, I'm glad her mum died too. Because this is about a woman who is now around the age of 30, coming to realize that she had a dreadful childhood, a very toxic relationship with an abusive mother, and now that that mother is dead, she is free to fix herself, to be medicated, to go to therapy, to meet and fall in love with healthy people, to have good friends, to find a good job, a good life, build her own idea of what life should be. Because her mother sent her down a very, very dark path. This memoir manages to do a lot of things. It is a warning against the dangers of what it's like being a child actor, something we've been talking about for generations at this point. But it also shows the telltale signs of an abusive relationship between a parent and a child, especially when that abuse is not often very clear. There's been such a wonderful movement recently in the realization of what abuse actually looks like. Neglect, for example, is a form of abuse, and neglect comes in more fashions than we think it does. People often look back on their childhoods and go, yeah, I had a decent childhood. My parents were nice to me. They never hit me, blah, blah, blah. That's a low bar. There's a lot of things that parents do to abuse us that we don't realize and we are coming to realize. And this memoir would definitely serve as a prop for that realization. A great example of what abuse can look like outside of the normal examples of abuse that we've come to recognize. And beyond the fact that this is a very dark, very funny, very bleak, dramatic, and possibly very triggering book, it's also one that is superbly well written. I'm Glad My Mum Died is written in very, very short chapters, all the way through. Most of the chapters in this book are 4 or 5 pages long at most. And so across 300 pages, you've got about 90 chapters. And they're basically vignettes. Each one jumps forward maybe a day, a week, a month, a year. We begin at the age of 6, and by the end, she is an adult, because it's a memoir. And all the while, it's written in the present tense. We are in the head of this young woman as she grows up. And she does her best, and she does a wonderful job of speaking through the mind, the experiences, and the feelings of herself at that time. So for example, when she gets her period, she reacts through this first-person narrative the way that she did when it happened, in retrospect. She shows us things through the eyes of a child. When she's 10 in the book, we see things the way a 10-year-old sees them, and we see this 10-year-old try to understand and deal with and reconcile the things around them. It's such a wonderful technique. It's a brilliant skill being utilized by this writer. It shows that McCurdy has a wonderful talent for writing, truly. It's amazing the power of the present tense in this book. And the power of the framing and the structure doesn't end there. There's also the fact that this has one of the most memorable prologues I've ever read. The prologue begins with her as an adult, with her brothers, sat in a hospital room, and their mother is in a coma. When Jeanette was a very, very small child, her mother was diagnosed with breast cancer, stage 4, and she survived. And then we know from the prologue that by the time Jeanette is in her 20s, her mother's cancer has returned, and it is the thing that eventually kills her. And in this prologue, her mother is in the hospital bed, in a coma, and the family sit around and take turns telling their mother things that might wake her up. Good news, positive things. Things like, my girlfriend and I are getting married. I'm moving home to California. Jeanette's thing is that she's hit her goal weight so that her mother will be proud of her. This goal weight tells us so much about their relationship. You've got a woman in her 20s who we know has grown up as a child actor, who has turned to her mother who's in a coma and said, I'm 89 pounds. This should wake you up. This should make you proud of me. This is the best news I can offer you. How much does that tell us about their relationship? About her mother's ideals, about her mother's interpretation of good parenting, of good life, of a good child, of a good woman. It tells us so much about the mother's attitude towards her child, her attitude towards a woman's role, a woman's body, a woman's rights, to success, to fame, to beauty, to acceptance. There's so much wrapped up in that line, and she knows that. That's how the prologue begins. And you can read that prologue, put the book down, and just think about what her childhood must have been like. If she's now in her 20s, she's already seen plenty of fame and success, and yet she still thinks that telling her mother that she's 89 pounds is the best thing she could tell her. This prologue leaves such a huge impact. Then in chapter 1, we go back to her age 6. Her mother is saying, right, you're going to be an actor, you're going to be the thing I didn't get to be. I'm doing this for you. This is narcissism. This is selfishness. This is abuse. And I have to say, I didn't grow up with narcissism as part of my childhood. I didn't suffer any narcissists and narcissism growing up. I have recently met a narcissist who has come into my life, and it is a dark and bleak thing. I am stuck with this narcissist and doing my best to keep her at arm's length, but they are dangerous people. I can tell that from 5 minutes spent with one. And McCurdy was raised by one. Her mother is intensely manipulative and narcissistic. Now, if we know that 89 pounds is a wonderful gift to give your mother, not the currency, just think about what her childhood was like. And as I already said, eating disorders are a big part of this. There's a moment where Jeanette is now 11, 12 years old. She's starting puberty. Her body is changing, and she's afraid. She doesn't want to grow up. She doesn't want to develop a more feminine form. And her mother says, well, there is a way we can avoid this. There is a way that we can keep you looking more petite, cute, small, and it's called calorie counting. Her mother instills in her the concept of an eating disorder. When I read that, I gasped. I was shaken. I was furious. I was so upset. I didn't think that a parent could behave that way. Obviously, we know parents can be abusive, physically. Parents can gaslight. Parents can do all sorts of horrible things. But that particular style of abuse and manipulation is something I haven't seen before, in fiction or real life, and it just chilled me. It made my blood run cold. This isn't really a book you can spoil. That's not really the point of it, so I don't mind telling little anecdotes from the book. But the fact that I'm telling you these anecdotes reveals just how powerful the book has been. And I can't imagine how much more powerful it would be, or it has been, to people who grew up watching iCarly and seeing Jeanette in a role that they loved. For me, what I'm seeing here is a person I've only known through this book itself. A young woman who was forced into acting at the age of 6, who suffered through so much abuse and torture, and did not know it was abuse or torture. That's what's so great about the present tense account, is you get to see the naivety of a child. You get to see that this child, in the moment, does not recognize what is happening to her. This is not an adult, age 30, looking back at her childhood and going, my mum abused me, here's a list of things she did. No, this is a first-person present tense account. This is what's happening to me now. My mummy loves me. My mum is looking after me. I'm going to be successful. I want to make her happy. My mother behaves inappropriately with me when it comes to my body, with food, with sex, with religious oppression. My mother is doing this for me. She's looking after me. She takes me to church. She watches what I eat. She checks my body for things. It gets really dark, and because it's all told from the perspective of a naive child who is growing up in a very toxic relationship with her mother and doesn't see it, your heart breaks for her. The way that this is written is astonishingly effective, and the content is a wonderful warning against abuse and toxicity in a parent-child relationship. I am floored by how good this is. I picked it up because I couldn't avoid the hype anymore. I was excited. I was completely won over by the title and the cover, which is very provocative, but for good reason. Because once you read it, once you get through this book, you go, yeah, I think it's safe to say we're all glad her mum died. This is exactly as good as everyone says it is. Maybe even better. Now it's time for my Patreon book recommendation of the week. This recommendation comes from Christine Bowers, and the book is The Actual Star by Monica Byrne. The Actual Star is a stunningly written, genre-bending novel addressing existential questions of our time. It's an historic novel, contemporary narrative, and speculative fiction all in one. The book jumps forward and backward with 3 different timelines telling the story of a pair of twins who rule a Maya kingdom in 1012. A young American tourist on a journey of self-discovery in modern-day Belize in 2012, and 2 world travelers with opposing religious and philosophical views in 3012. Throughout the story, Byrne leaves little hints as to how the main characters are connected, what personality traits they share. The choice of names for all the different characters is purposeful, and once you've noticed those and other clues, it becomes oddly satisfying, as if you have solved a puzzle. Even though the main characters of each timeline are connected, all of them are fully fleshed individuals with their own history, experience, and view of the world. All are relatable, and especially those from 2012, including all supporting cast, feel like people you might know or have met. Byrne painstakingly researched Mayan history and current-day Belize, and it shows. Every little detail in the historic and modern-day timelines feels so authentic. The use of Belize Creole patois, Spanish, and Mayan terms enrich this book beautifully. I loved all the timelines, but particularly the one in far future of 3012. Such wonderful imagination. What a future to hope for and to feel strangely deprived of for not being able to live in it. You could be a mermaid. Technology is invented to support climate refugees instead of making a profit. But also the described possible consequences of climate change and capitalism feel bizarrely frightening at the same time, as things that we take comfort in, like family and close friendships, may no longer exist as we know them today. Wow. This book sounds incredible. and I had no idea it even existed. So thank you so much, Christine. I'll be checking this out very soon, and I hope other people do too. If you haven't already picked this up, I really think you need to. Subscribe for books.